There we are again. Hello. Get my head almost to scale. I can get my body right in the spot. I keep moving the wrong arms. Anyway, Teleologic Jones here. In my commanding pose. Coming back at you with a new video. The follow-up of the last one, which was the introduction to Earth Intention. And this video will be a further consideration of Earth Intention, as well as a critique of the mutual mass attraction hypothesis. I feel it necessary to do that, at least for a little bit, before I just embark in just conversation about I need that on my chin, do I? Conversation about just my conception of Earth Intention on its own, without having to, constantly refer to that which I'm rejecting, but because of the great import socially of the Newtonian system, it's important to thoroughly critique it. So rather than having me there all the time, I guess that's the thing. Like, people are supposedly like the personal touch. They want to see the face of the person. Well, leave a comment. I prefer to disappear. We had discussed before about, or in the last video, we were talking about Earth Intention, and we were talking about this acceleration of objects to Earth. We actually see it better here. That an object at rest or being held has weight, and that weight can be understood as a momentum that is equal to its weight, which is also equal to its mass or mass quantity. And then when it's in motion, it expresses as fall. This momentum is released, and it's released in fall. And it's released not in fall just as in a straight linear travel. It's released in fall as a progressively increasing velocity, at least for a good portion of its travel, as we'll see. So this weight intention, which is not a function, as we had discussed, of the object itself, but is a function of Earth's intention influencing it, we want to make it clear that this activity, and you can just do a casual kind of experiment with yourself by picking something up and dropping it, feeling how it feels in your hand. The effect is, it's not pushing, it's not pulling, but something that we can only describe as falling. Yeah, I don't expect to answer this question absolutely right now, but just for consideration that it is a unique motive that moves things. It's not like pushing or pulling, which would be what a physical motive would do, but it seems to be inherent in the object itself, and yet what in the object would be moving it? Why would all objects willfully choose to move in the exact same direction, in the exact same way? It's the whole of the structure of Earth that tells us what's going on. Another sound of summertime. That's somewhat of a passing comment. But what we do have is that constant weight intention, which remains when it's in fall. But as we said before, at every instance of fall, it has a current velocity based on its motive through space toward the center of Earth, under the influence of this Earth intention, which is set, or at least which is experienced by the each object as if it were a force equal to its own volume, its own mass quantity. And so if we look back here, or further down here, what we looked at before with the space-time graph, and just to make this clear, this is not describing the pattern of the arc of an object falling through space as if it were falling like this. This is time, and this is distance or space. And it's seeing them as correlated. So it's taking that correlation we have between, any fall distance we pick as 1, well, that's going to have a corresponding time. And if we do this graph based on any d and t, we will create this kind of unit graph. And so many different falls would create unit graphs that if we were to now look at that distance here, it would find a different location on the graph. So it's not a fixed reality. This is a very general concept which can be used for any fall. It can be used for the 16 feet that is, or 16.09 feet that is the fall of objects to Earth. Or it can be used as, actual 16 or 15 or 14 or 10 or 5. Whatever we chose, there would be a time corresponding that it took for it to fall that much. And then based on that, the rest of the progression would manifest. This would manifest. It's always consistent. It knows nothing of any particular d or t. It only knows, it only expresses as a perfect will of effort upon the objects of Earth, directing them towards the center of Earth. We noted also before that we can find the current velocity. I made a bit of a muddle in some videos by just being too quick and forgetting to consult my notes or my work that isn't in the book. I mean, I gave a brief account of the unit fall graph in the book, and now I'm here trying to explain acceleration in a more complex way, and I made a simple visual error by saying that this 32 feet is twice that, therefore the gravitational acceleration is equal to the current velocity of an object or current fall of an object, because that's what this would be if this was 16. We can see it clearer in the next graph. If this is the unit, if the red square or the red triangle is the unit fall, and this is 1 current velocity equals 16, well, where it's going to reach at that time is 32. In this case, it's 1 and 1, so it's doubled. But we'll come back to what that means. So just in case in any of the videos I fail to purge this confusion, this will be the go-to, the orthodox view, as it were. But we want to talk about acceleration because it's a curious thing. We see it here. We see it here. How we see it visually. It may be difficult to actually make these marks watching things, but with a camera we can slow the process down, and we can visibly say, at one time unit it's here, at one time unit it's 4 down, at one time unit it's another. It's 9 down, at another time unit it's 16 down, and so it's gaining as it goes through this process. But what does that mean for something to be accelerating? Well, acceleration is motive by the Newtonian system, or at least by his later adherents. Whether he himself really thought this or not is another matter of historical interest, which I do not have time to be getting into right now. So when I speak of the Newtonian tradition of mutual mass attraction, I'm speaking more than just of the man himself, Isaac Newton, because he has had adherents that have followed him that have added to his system in a way that he may or may not have been keen on or found justified. So and yet the tradition definitely bears his name, so we for shorthand refer to it as the Newtonian system of mutual mass attraction. So we have this acceleration is here, and it's twice what we have here. And because this is stated like this, because this is saying fall is equal to 16 times seconds squared, this is putting it into a unit form. We're saying, what are seconds? Well, seconds have in the 1 second fall, how far does it go? Well, it goes 16 feet. So that becomes the unit of the fall. So, and if we look at the fall graph, we see here that if that is the unit of the fall, is it going to fit on here? Not quite. That curious 49 showed up on my screen, and I don't know how to get rid of it other than to restart the computer. Anyway, we'll take it as just an obnoxious thing for now. So we see if this is one that the location, and that is the current velocity of the ball, or whatever it is that's falling, the falling object. I was hiding out in the bathroom because of a jackhammer in the street, and it appears to have either had gone for lunch or finished its job. There is something deeply menacing about certain aspects of modern society. I may have to flee into there again. So remember what we're saying here. I need to remember what we're saying here. What I'm saying here is that at any given moment of fall, it could be here, could be here, could be here, could be any moment of fall, there will be a corresponding current velocity. And that current velocity can be found as VC equals 2Tn. As we saw in the unit graph, which is now here, but with some other, that would be the red graph, or the red triangular form on the page is the unit graph, and that's the unit fall. That's when we reach the unit velocity, right? And we have this because if we look right here, this spot right here is important in that it is the unit fall. It is the moment at which an object reaches in fall from Earth under Earth's intention, where at 1t it falls 1d, or once it's reached 1d, it reaches that in 1t, and that's this number here and these numbers here. And so these units are then set by the graph, the graph is documenting these numbers set. Now, if the objects were merely moving at a linear velocity, this would be the line of their travel by time. We would be traveling in tenths of the unit and reaching these points here, and then we would travel at 1 t, we would reach 1d, and then of course at 2t we would reach 2d. But that's not the case with acceleration. It's slowly speeding up. But that means that there's this thing at the beginning and through and past the thing wherein past the progression of the fall, wherein that the earlier portion it is traveling slower than this velocity. And at some point, it has to be traveling at more than this velocity, this linear velocity of 1, to make up for the slower 4 portion, and so reach the unit fall at the unit time as if under a constant velocity. And so it becomes clear then that somewhere along the line of travel, we have to find a moment in which it is traveling at the unit velocity. Well, by this geometric method, we have determined that that should be right here at halfway through the time of the fall, the unit fall, which is to here. Halfway through, it achieves, and at 0.25 of its distance of the unit fall, it achieves this moment of unit velocity. So when it achieves that moment of unit velocity, if it were, what that means its current velocity is 1. And we understand that to mean not how fast it is traveling at that instant. The next instant, it's already traveling faster. The instant before, it was traveling slower. It's not traveling at a constant velocity. It's traveling at a constantly transforming velocity. So as it moves forward through this process, we can ask, though, at each moment, let's say we cut off the intention. There was no longer Earth's intention pushing down on the object, right? And so if the Earth's intention is no longer pushing down on the object, it's going to coast in free space, because an object at motion remains at motion unless enacted upon by an outside force. So it would coast along, and so in the next time iteration from here, in this time iteration, because that's what this is the corresponding t of the corresponding d. If it's allowed to coast along for that time, well, it's going to travel just like we saw here at that constant velocity until it reaches here, at which point it will continue on again into the next time. But that's not what happens in this case. What happens in this case is that it's speeding up because it has this intention added to it all the time. And so that where it actually is in 1 unit of time from that measurement of the time when it had this much velocity is it has this much velocity. It's traveled this much distance. Its velocity would be something quite other. We'd have to then say that its velocity is twice this, so it would be twice 1.5. It would have a velocity actually of 3. So its current velocity at the moment that it crosses this point is 3. So we see that acceleration is constantly, in a very important way, is constantly changing. And yet we see here also something quite interesting about how this develops. If we look at this other instance, I put it in blue so that there'd be maybe some greater clarity in looking at it. We can see here we have time, a correlation of t and d, which is x and y in graphing tradition. So we saw in this first instance at 0.5 t that it had fallen 0.25 in a distance. And then we saw how that projected. Well, now we have this case where we've got 0.3 t. Well, 0.3 squared is 0.09. That's the way we can find these correlations, because that's right here. What's the distance? Well, it's equal to the time to get there squared. So the time, as in 0.5 squared, is 0.25. But we see here with this new other fall that at 0.09 of fall and at 0.3 of time, if we project out the time unit in which we're measuring, the t, the corresponding dt, the time unit we measured, we see that by this tangential method of dropping down a fall line from that end of the timeline, we see that the tangent subtends the fall line at 0.6. So that means if it were left to its own devices with no longer on the influence of Earth's intention, from this point it would just simply travel down this 0.6 distance of fall. But it doesn't do that, because under the influence of the Earth's intention, by the time we travel this much time, the object falling has actually made it to this point. And so what is the distance of that fall? Well, we see that it is the same in all cases. Well, so far we see it, that that's the case. I did do it just to make sure that we weren't correlating two things. Even in the case of even in this case of t being 0.2, the same projection works, goes down, and this is 10 units down, or one whole unit of time, or 1 unit time. There we go. Said it as clearly as I could finally. So this is a consistent property, and such that we can make the statement, what is acceleration in this case? Well, acceleration is taking whatever unit corresponding time and distance that we begin with. We will always have, after we do this projection, from any correlation along the line that projects from this reality, this is what this is. I should put this here, that'll make that clear. That's what this moment is right here, is T1, D1. And from that graph set to any scale of T and D, if we project the T line out, we will see that we will have a varied current velocity, which in this case is 0.6. But in terms of the fall of the object, it will always be 1 d, a consistent d, more down. And that's what can be confounding in the unit case. It's why when you do these things, you need to do more than just find the one thing and say, oh, look at that. It's acceleration equals to twice the fall. Well, it doesn't. It only equals twice the fall in a single case, and not in every case. So instead, we have this projection, though, where every time at any even increment of motion, and we see by the new formula that the current acceleration of an object is equal to the total fall of the object less the current velocity of the object. And that acceleration will always equal the unit distance, which is what this is. Now the acceleration here, which at twice, that's only the case in the unit case. Now I'd have to go back and see where how this was derived by Galileo. But I'm curious about this now, more so, but let's, for now stick with what we can see and know in the case that we are considering. So what we know about acceleration of objects in fall is that acceleration is fixed, but it equals d1. It can't equal effectively 2 times d1, as in this case. It's only true in the unit case. In this case, if we were to project this line down through here, and this line down through here, and this line continued, we would see that, of course, that would match what we can see more easily here. So more than a little curious. That's actually, I believe, new to me. I may have looked at that a couple of years ago when I was looking at this, but I've been, concerned with so many things that it's hard to keep track all the time what you're concerned with, or what tools you need, or what bits of knowledge you need at any given point. But we can see here that acceleration is a fixed reality, but it is, in fact, this is the acceleration. There is nothing about this that I can understand from what we're looking at here. Acceleration is this, and it is added to the current velocity of an object over the next period of time, over the next unit time. So we can see then that acceleration is not something that can be understood, or rate of change is not something that can be understood at a given moment. At any given moment, all an object has is its current velocity. I mean, there is the knowledge of its past movements, we could say. We could, because of knowing its current velocity, we can go back and we can project forward its future. But at any given moment, what it has is its current velocity. What story it will tell after that will depend on the conditions that it's in. I mean, these are ideal vacuum conditions we're talking about here. If it's rolling down a hill, or if it bumps into something, or if the medium becomes more viscous or less viscous, and so forth, then that will change this, because that would be another factor that would be on this equation. This equation is the base equation for ideal vacuum conditions. Those are almost never the true conditions, but we see I see there that we've made I think we've made there sufficient justification. There are some other aspects of the acceleration that we discuss in some of the other clips. I hope I don't have too much error in them, or half understanding, shall we say. So I will leave that for maybe some voiceovers in these first few videos, and we'll continue on the discussion as it has already been presented or been made. Thanks. As we said before, an object at motion remains in motion at a constant velocity unless enacted upon by an outside force, and an object at rest remains at rest unless, of course, enacted upon by an outside force. So an object has, at any given time, a kind of base condition, a direction, and an underlying velocity. But the objects falling by Earth's intention also have added to them this momentum of weight, which is constantly pressing on them. They're speeding up. They're not being weighed because they're not being up against anything. But if they're going to impact anything, well, then they're going to have the momentum of that impact is going to be equal to the weight, which it always has. That's what's driving it forward. That's what it has here. It doesn't go anywhere when it starts to move. It only gains momentum through its velocity, through the weight of the object, or the mass of the object times its current velocity. And that we will leave further discussion of that for another video. For this video, we want to concentrate, and perhaps I'll try to keep these down to single issues now that I've begun to kind of hammer the thing out a little bit. So what we want to do then is have a look at this question of acceleration. And acceleration is change in velocity, and the change in velocity is because of the addition of the constant presence of this weight motive, We're calling it a weight motive, but it's a motive that is equal to the weight of the object at rest. So that's the best way that we can quantify it. It's much more difficult to quantify it through space or through motion. And that it is constantly being added to the current velocity over the continuum of the fall. I mean, we could be breaking this down into any units we want, and we're still going to have this same condition where this weight motive is adding to the current velocity, such that instead of falling from this point only this far, it falls even further. So let's have a look in the book at where this goes to. So we've blown up our, or at least expanded the range of our graph here. This here is the unit fall. So you can see here we got T1 and D1. So this is our T1, D1. If this is 1 second, well, that's 16. And we see this nature of the fall, and how there. What is the nature of the increase? I mean, we see clearly that things are speeding up, right? In the first time iteration, we move 1 distance unit. In the second time iteration, we move 3 distance units. So we move to the 4th unit. In the next time iteration, we move 5 distance units. We move to the 9th unit. In the next time iteration, we move 7 units. We move to the 16th unit. And though, clearly this is speeding up, there is a pattern, a very linear pattern that we see here, in that each of these numbers is 2 greater than the previous number. And this is the nature of that weight motive acceleration. It's an even gain constantly. But because it is an even gain, the rate of acceleration is decreasing, as we saw with that other graph. Over here we have, okay, so what is the difference of each of these compared to the previous one? What is going on here with this? Well, we have our initial fall. Well, we take any movement from rest to movement of any distance and time to be an infinite change. That's just, if somebody else has a better way they'd like to describe it, they can. But what we're talking about is a transformation from stillness to motion. How do you compare motion to stillness? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? Well, this is infinitely flexible in terms of how you can interpret it. None of these are, as we said, these are not fixed times or distances. This is true for any time or distance we might choose. So we have an infinite increase by the time we get to here. But once we've gotten to here, now we've established a scale in space and time. So once that scale is established, whether that's 1 centimeter of fall or a millisecond of time, a centimeter of fall to here, or a millisecond of time to here, or whatever it is that we choose, this pattern will then unfold according to those time and distance correlations. And those correlations are absolute throughout the plenum of the intention, of the plenum of Earth intentions motive. So at unit 1, we have infinite change. We have, how much change is there between the first and the second? Well, it's 3 times. Oh, well, that's a big decrease already. Like, we've dropped from infinity to 3. And then the next unit, it drops 5. Well, what is 3 into 5? Well, it's 1.66. So we've already got down to 1, which would be, if it was always just traveling at 1, it would be a constant velocity. As soon as we get to this being only 1, we have a constant velocity. No more acceleration. By the next one, 5 and 7, we have 1.4 and so on. We see that there is a decrease in the rate of acceleration of objects because the influence is constant. The influence is adding 2. And that adding of 2 is due to the constant weight intention of the object. I'm not saying that I understand this right here. I'm only making observations. I'm making both observations, or taking the direct observations. I've worked on a rational scheme, have determined certain things through reason, but it's grounded in observation. And then taking that observation and reasoning and extrapolating it and analyzing, this is in a sense rational empirical data. I haven't observed these numbers, but I've observed what the rate and nature of fall is, and then having taken that, I can then have a rational discussion, and as long as I don't engage in contradiction, I can discover things that are true about it. So this is the nature of falling objects. And if we go a little further down in the book, so this is chapter 7 of the book. It was chapter 5, I believe, last time. I don't think I made a chapter reference. A little plug for the book. It would be nice if I don't think anyone has bought the book yet. Not that I've been really promoting it a lot yet, but it would be nice to start selling some. Partly just because that'd be nice, but also, this is the work I hope to do. I think I'm good at it, and I think what I've come up with is fairly unique. But unless it at least pays some of my food and shelter, I got to keep swinging a hammer. So, not that I totally resent swinging a hammer. It's taught me much. In fact, much of this work that I do here is, I think, because of the pragmatism of my life as a tradesperson working in the material world. But, I'm not a young man anymore. I just turned 58. At some point, that I'm past prime on doing that work. And I would like to devote my life to doing this work. I don't need a ton of money to get by. I'm a very frugal or cheap liver in many ways. Not necessarily always frugal, but anyway, I'm a cheap date, shall we say? And so anyway, that's just a little plug. If anybody feels that the desire to support by purchasing books or by making donations, I would only put any money that I receive from this channel toward the promotion, toward the production of the next book. So we see here in this graph, because this would get too long too soon. We wouldn't see too much. It'd be many pages long, and at some point visual depictions are not necessary. That raw data actually kind of does the job better. So we start again with 1 time at and the distance per time that it falls. Well, and then we have the acceleration. What is the acceleration between the previous one, which is actually 0? I don't have that listed here. Well, it's infinite. At time 2, we have 3 times faster than or further than the last time. At time 3, we have 1.66, and we can see here at times 4, 1.4, time 5, 1.2. So we can see how quickly it begins. By the time we get to the 14th iteration, or second in the case of fall at Earth, we're already at 1 and only 800ths, not even a tenth, faster than it was the previous travel, because it traveled 25, now it travels 27, then 29, then 31. You can see it's only adding 2 units of travel, 2D per t further of travel. And then this carries on to here, where we're down to 1/100th, almost 2, at 60 iterations. And by the time we get to the end of this graph, or this chart that I made in the book, at the 120th time iteration, we have only the difference between that and the 119th of 237 to 239. And the difference is now we're down into 8 thousandths. You can see as this carries on, we eventually get to 0. Not 0, we get to 1. We get to the unity. Now, we don't actually ever get there, of course, because that's the nature of these things. Now, in a vacuum, we wouldn't get there. But there is a thing, I make the point here. Let's just read this section of the book, or the chapter. By the graph in figure 34, that was this graph here that we looked at. By the graph in figure 34, after the initial acceleration, we have a proportional diminishing of the acceleration rate. We conceive the unit fall, or any other unit fall distance, as being infinitely faster than the ball at rest. Within the next time unit, the ball has fallen 3 more distance units. That is 3 times as far as the first time unit. Between the second and third time units, the ball falls 5D, or 1.66 times the previous time unit's fall of 3D. 7 over 5 equals 1.4 for the next time unit. Then 9 over 7 equals 1.28. 11 over 9 equals 1.22. 13 over 11 equals 1.8, etc. And so, in figure 35, the graph that we just, or the chart that we looked at here, we see that terminal velocity has as much to do with a diminishing rate of acceleration, that is a decrease in displacement per time unit, as it does to do with the resistance of the air medium. So we see that the object is actually increasingly becomes at motive rest as it moves. You see, I use this word displacement there, and that is a word that I use often interchangeably with the term or the word acceleration. And as we had discussed before, an object moving at a constant velocity, which is what this current velocity would be if the gravity were turned off, that would be an object moving at what we consider motive rest, and it can be displaced either by turning or by speeding up or by slowing down. And if it speeds up, well, that's acceleration. And all of these I consider to be forms of displacement from rest. Rest meaning actually sitting still, like this, not moving. Or rest from moving at a constant velocity. This kind of motion is in a constant state of displacement because it's constantly having that change put over it. And yet we see that the object is actually moving toward a state of motive rest through this falling state because it is decreasing in displacement moment by moment until it clearly over time approaches unity with its acceleration. That is, each time, the next time interval is basically the same speed as the previous time interval. In this case, 237 units traveled at 119 seconds, if we take that as being seconds. In this case, 239 units 1 second later. And we can multiply these by 16 feet to get the amount, but you get the idea. So just to wrap up the implications of what we've been looking at here, by this graph, by the data chart, by the whole presentation of acceleration that we've shown, which is that an object that is under the influence, that is in acceleration, such as this here, that each time it has its own current state of velocity that it would have if all conditions of influence were suddenly cut off. And it has as acceleration only that portion which is additional to that, which we saw here is this portion which is 2 more each time interval applied to the object in fall under the influence of gravity, or under the influence of earth intention, as I would prefer to call it, and that this is what causes objects to fall at this rate. So we've shown, or I've demonstrated, I believe, for now, and I'm going to finish this video now just with this summary, that we see a reduction in acceleration, not an increase as an object approaches the Earth. That the influence is consistent throughout the fall. That it is not something that increases as distance decreases. Because as distance here decreases, that would necessarily make this number larger. And since this number is this number, which is really just twice this number would be increasing instant by instant. And we should have rather a formula, even if it was subtle, we should have a formula that indicates that by that distance change, this number should be constantly a dynamic changing number. And it is not. It is not by the Newtonian formula, and it is not by the empirical evidence that we have of how objects fall. So that is one of the ways in which we can determine that this attraction, or this, I didn't even want to say attraction because now I'm giving into this idea that this motion of objects is not actually an attraction, that it is in fact a directive, and that directive is quite simply the constant weight impetus, weight intention upon all objects. Now we can begin to have a bigger conversation of why does this happen across all objects? Is this a field? Sometimes it's called a gravitational field. Is this an earth intentional field that we live in? But since it's moving all objects at the same speed regardless of mass, this implies that it is a rational field. This implies that this intention, because it is a plenary intention across all objects, making all objects move not by physical means, but by conceptual means, that it is a rational or conceptual effort. Pardon me. That it is a rational or conceptual effort of divine will. What other will but a divine will could be capable of doing this thing, not just to these two objects, which would be sufficient, but to all objects forming the earth into a sphere. Now this is only one of the reasons why we bring into question, or I bring into question, the material or physical cause of Earth as sphere, and it is the beginning of my work in this, or at least the beginning of the presentation. And so what I'm meaning to show here is that when I make the claim that in the very natural, philosophical, and mathematical analysis of the world, from this formula to its presentation like this, that the rational implications the necessary implications of these systems and discoveries is that this effort is conceptual and omniscient, therefore, and this is also omnipotent. And so we see in the very being of things, not just in some general sense, but in the particularities of being, when we analyze it and we're willing to see the divine presence and the divine will behind things, we see that this world cannot be held together by accidental, random process, but is necessarily created and directed by a divine will. That this is all a rational conception and an effort of divine will. And so we can see in this a creative, rational will is behind being. And we can understand this in the Trinitarian sense as being the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. And there's much more to say about that in time, but I'll just leave that with you now. And this contemplation on the state of something so common to us all. We live amongst it, within it, all day long, every day. But when we look at it closely, and we see this intention of Earth, we find out that it is rational concept, an effort of divine will, a creative, rational will, which conforms very well to the Orthodox Christian understanding that God is triune, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Till next time, Teleologic Jones out.